The morning mist clung to Thunder River like forgotten prayers, and across the valley, smoke rose from cooking fires that had burned since before memory began. It was the autumn of 1847, when the leaves turned gold and red like scattered coins. Across Montana Territory, and the Stonehawk people prepared for the harsh winter that would test every soul within their borders. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. High above Whispering Pine Valley, where the ancient ceremonies once brought peace between warring tribes, a darkness had settled over Ironcliff Village. It wasn't the natural darkness of approaching winter, but something deeper, colder, the kind that comes when power corrupts the very heart of a people's sacred ways. In the center of the village stood the Great Lodge, its timber walls carved with the stories of generations, its doorway guarded by totems that once welcomed all who sought justice. But those days had passed 3 summers ago, when Chief Blackstone claimed leadership after his father's sudden death, and the old ways began to crumble like autumn leaves beneath heavy boots. The chief ruled with an iron fist wrapped in tradition, twisting ancient customs to serve his growing hunger for wealth and control. Where once the Stonehawk people had traded fairly with neighboring settlements, now they demanded tribute. Where once disputes were settled by council wisdom, now they were decided by the chief's whims and violent temper. And on this particular morning, as the sun struggled to break through clouds heavy with coming snow, a wagon approached from the direction of Fort Clearwater, carrying a burden that would change everything. Maya Rivers had known this day would come, though knowing and accepting were 2 different kinds of pain. She sat in the back of the wagon, her hands folded in her lap, watching the familiar landscape of her childhood disappear behind them with each turn of the wheels. The pine trees that had sheltered her family's cabin now looked like sentinels marking the boundary between her old life and whatever awaited her in Ironcliff Village. Her father, Thomas Rivers, had been a fur trapper and trader, one of the few white men the Stonehawk people had trusted for nearly 2 decades. He'd learned their language, respected their customs, and never cheated them in the exchanges that kept both communities fed through the harsh Montana winters. Maya had grown up hearing Stonehawk stories around their fireplace, learning the songs her mother Sarah hummed while mending clothes, understanding that some bonds transcended the color of one's skin or the place of one's birth. But trust, Maya had learned, was as fragile as ice over a rushing stream. One mistake, one moment of desperation, and everything could shatter. The mistake had been her father's gambling debt to a group of rough traders from back east, men who didn't care about honor or friendship, only profit. When they'd come to collect what Thomas owed, they'd found a man with empty pockets and a daughter whose beauty had caught their attention in ways that made Maya's stomach turn cold with fear. The deal they'd struck was simple and brutal. Thomas Rivers would give them his best horses and his daughter, or they would take both anyway and leave his family's bodies for the wolves. Faced with impossible choices, Thomas had made the only decision a desperate father could make. He'd approached Chief Blackstone with an offer that would settle his debts, and he prayed, keep Maya safe under the protection of tribal law. 20 of Thomas's finest horses in exchange for taking Maya as the chief's wife. It was presented as an honor, a joining of 2 communities, a sacred bond that would strengthen the ties between the Stonehawk people and the few white settlers they still trusted. But Maya knew the truth. She was being sold like livestock to a man whose reputation for cruelty had reached even their isolated valley. The wagon jolted over a particularly rough patch of ground, and Maya gripped the wooden sides to steady herself. Beside her sat Anna Featherwind, Chief Blackstone's current wife, a woman whose face had long ago learned to hide whatever thoughts moved behind her dark eyes. Anna had been sent to collect Maya and prepare her for what was to come, but she'd spoken barely a dozen words during the entire journey. Maya studied Anna's profile, noting the careful way she held herself, the slight tension in her shoulders. That never seemed to ease. Here was a woman who understood the weight of being owned rather than loved, who had learned to survive by becoming as still and unremarkable as a shadow. Maya wondered if she too would learn to disappear into herself, to become a ghost in her own life. The first sight of Ironcliff Village took Maya's breath away, though not for reasons she had expected. The settlement spread across a natural plateau overlooking Thunder River, its lodges arranged in careful circles that spoke of generations of planning and tradition. Smoke from dozens of cooking fires created a hazy canopy over the community, and she could see children playing between the structures, while their mothers worked at various tasks that kept the village functioning. For a moment, Maya allowed herself to imagine that this could become home, that perhaps the stories of Chief Blackstone's cruelty had been exaggerated by distance and fear. Perhaps she could find a place among these people, learn their ways more deeply than she had as an occasional visitor, maybe even find something approaching happiness in a life she had never chosen. That hope died the moment she saw Chief Blackstone himself. He stood waiting in front of the great lodge, surrounded by a handful of warriors whose loyalty was purchased rather than earned. Everything about the man radiated a cold authority that had nothing to do with wisdom or justice. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with features that might have been handsome if they hadn't been twisted by years of selfishness and casual cruelty. His clothes were finer than necessary, decorated with beadwork and feathers that announced his status to anyone who might have doubts about his importance. But it was his eyes that made Maya's blood turn to ice water in her veins. They looked at her not as a person, not even as a woman, but as a possession he had acquired. There was no warmth there, no curiosity about who she might be beneath the surface, no recognition that she had thoughts and feelings and dreams that mattered. She was simply another thing he owned, like his horses or his weapons or the lodge that housed his growing collection of treasures taken from those too weak to resist him. The wagon came to a stop, and Anna Featherwind finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Remember, child. Survive first. Everything else comes after." Before Maya could ask what she meant, Chief Blackstone was striding toward them, his warriors falling into step behind him like a pack of wolves following their alpha. He reached the wagon and extended a hand to help Maya down, but the gesture felt more like a claim being staked than an act of courtesy. "Maya Rivers," he said, and her name sounded wrong in his mouth, like a word from a language he was still learning to speak. "Welcome to your new home. I trust your journey was comfortable." Maya took his hand because refusing would only make things worse later, but she couldn't bring herself to smile or pretend gratitude she didn't feel. "Thank you, Chief Blackstone. I hope to honor the agreement between our families." He smiled at that, but it was the kind of smile a cat might give a cornered mouse. "Oh, you will honor it. Of that, I have no doubt." The way he said it made Maya's skin crawl, but before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Brother, perhaps you should allow our guest to rest before overwhelming her with your enthusiasm." Maya turned toward the sound and felt her breath catch in her throat. Walking toward them from the direction of a smaller lodge, set slightly apart from the others, was a man who looked enough like Chief Blackstone to clearly be related, but different in every way that mattered. Where the chief was all sharp edges and cold calculation, this man moved with a quiet grace that spoke of inner peace rather than barely controlled violence. He was slightly shorter than his brother, with the same dark hair and strong features, but his eyes held warmth and intelligence rather than hunger. His clothes were simpler, more practical, and around his neck hung a medicine pouch that marked him as a healer rather than a warrior. Most importantly, when he looked at Maya, she saw recognition there, not of her as an object to be possessed, but as a human being deserving of basic respect. Chief Blackstone's jaw tightened at the interruption, but he couldn't completely ignore a challenge made in front of his warriors. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniel, always the gentle soul. Maya Rivers, this is my younger brother, Daniel Blackstone. He tends to forget that some of us have more important duties than playing with herbs and bandages. Daniel stepped closer, and Maya caught the scent of sage and sweetgrass that clung to his clothes. When he spoke, his voice was steady and calm, but she sensed steel underneath the silk. Healing is never unimportant, brother. And neither is treating people with dignity, especially those who come to us seeking protection. The words hung in the air between the two men like a challenge thrown down at a duel. Maya realized she was witnessing something that went far deeper than a simple disagreement about hospitality. This was a fundamental conflict between two very different philosophies about how power should be used and how people should be treated. Chief Blackstone's eyes narrowed dangerously, and for a moment, Maya thought he might strike his brother right there in front of everyone. But then he seemed to remember where he was and who was watching, and the mask of civilized authority slipped back into place. "Of course," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "Daniel, perhaps you would be so kind as to escort Maya to the women's lodge so she can prepare for tonight's ceremony. I'm sure she's eager to begin her new life among us." Daniel nodded, but his eyes never left his brother's face. "It would be my honor." He turned to Maya and offered his arm with genuine respect rather than possessive claiming. "If you would permit me, Maya Rivers." Maya took his arm gratefully, noting how different his touch felt from his brother's. Where Chief Blackstone's hand had felt like a trap closing, Daniel's felt like an anchor in a storm. As they walked away from the wagon and the chief's cold stare, Daniel spoke quietly, his words meant for her ears alone. "The women's lodge is where unmarried women and visitors stay until they have permanent homes arranged. You'll be safe there, at least for tonight. Anna Featherwind will look after you and explain our customs." Maya glanced back over her shoulder and saw Chief Blackstone still watching them, his expression unreadable but definitely unhappy. "And after tonight?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that told Maya he understood exactly what she was really asking. "After tonight, things will be more complicated. But you should know that not everyone in this village agrees with my brother's interpretation of our laws. Some of us remember what our father taught about justice and compassion." They had reached the women's lodge, a spacious structure built in the traditional style, but decorated with beautiful paintings and carvings that spoke of the creativity and skill of the women who lived there. Daniel paused at the entrance, his hand still steady under Maya's arm. "Tonight there will be a feast to celebrate your arrival," he said, his voice careful and measured. "Tomorrow my brother will expect the formal marriage ceremony to take place. But Maya Rivers, I want you to know something important." She turned to face him fully, struck by the intensity in his dark eyes. "Our laws say that a woman cannot be forced into marriage against her will. That law has been overlooked in recent years, but it still exists. And there are those of us who believe the old ways should be honored, no matter what pressure we face to abandon them." Before Maya could respond, Daniel stepped back and offered her a traditional bow of respect. "Rest well, Maya Rivers. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but tonight, you are under the protection of the Stonehawk People, and that still means something to some of us." He turned and walked away, leaving Maya standing at the entrance to the women's lodge with her heart pounding and her mind racing. For the first time since leaving her family's cabin, she felt something other than despair. It was small and fragile, like a candle flame in a windstorm, but it was there. Hope. Anna Featherwind appeared at the lodge entrance, her expression as carefully neutral as ever, but Maya thought she detected something new in the older woman's eyes. Perhaps approval. Perhaps recognition. Perhaps the beginning of an alliance that neither of them dared speak aloud. "Come," Anna said simply. There is much to prepare and little time to do it, but first you must eat and rest. The trials ahead will require all your strength." As Maya followed Anna into the lodge, she carried with her the memory of Daniel Blackstone's words and the promise they contained. She was still trapped, still facing a future she had never chosen, but she was no longer completely alone. And sometimes Maya was beginning to understand that was enough to start changing everything. The women's lodge buzzed with quiet activity as dawn painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Maya had slept fitfully on a soft bed of buffalo hides and woven blankets, her dreams filled with images of home and uncertainty about what lay ahead. She woke to find Anna Featherwind already moving about the space, preparing what looked like ceremonial garments with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "The feast begins at sunset," Anna said without looking up from her work. "Until then, you will learn our ways. Not because you must, but because knowledge is armor, and you will need every protection you can gather." Other women began arriving throughout the morning, each bringing something different. Ruth Moonhawk, the village healer and Daniel's mentor, came with herbs and medicines, teaching Maya which plants could ease pain and which could make a person dangerously ill. Her weathered hands moved with practiced grace as she demonstrated how to prepare tinctures and poultices, but her real lessons came in whispered warnings about the chief's temper and advice about staying invisible when his mood turned dark. An elderly woman named Grace Starweaver brought stories, sitting cross-legged on the floor and speaking in the old language while Anna translated. Through these tales, Maya learned about the Stonehawk People's history, their beliefs about marriage and family, and most importantly, the ancient laws that Chief Blackstone claimed to follow but routinely ignored when they didn't serve his purposes. "In the old times," Grace said, her voice like wind through dry leaves, "a woman's consent was sacred. No marriage could take place without her freely given word, spoken 3 times before the Council of Elders. A forced union was considered an abomination that would bring cursing upon the entire tribe." Maya absorbed every word, filing away information that might prove useful later. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about her own fate, but about a much larger struggle for the soul of the Stonehawk people. Chief Blackstone represented a new way of thinking that valued power and wealth above tradition and honor, while others like Daniel and these women clung to the wisdom of their ancestors. As the day progressed, Maya found herself drawn into the rhythm of lodge life. She helped prepare food for the evening feast, her hands working alongside women who had initially regarded her with suspicion, but were gradually warming to her presence. She learned to weave grass into baskets, to repair torn clothing with neat, invisible stitches, and to read the subtle signs that indicated when someone needed help, but was too proud to ask for it. It was during the afternoon, while she was grinding corn into meal, that Maya first noticed the undercurrents of fear that ran through even these simple domestic tasks. Women would glance toward the great lodge whenever voices were raised there, their hands pausing in their work until the sounds died away. Children were kept close, never allowed to wander too far from their mother's watchful eyes. And whenever Chief Blackstone's warriors passed by, conversation would stop entirely until they were well out of earshot. "He wasn't always like this," Anna said quietly, following Maya's gaze toward the great lodge where angry voices could be heard even at this distance. "When we were young, before he became chief, Blackstone was different. Ambitious, yes, but not cruel. It was the responsibility that changed him, or perhaps it simply revealed what was always there beneath the surface." Maya set down her grinding, stoned and studied Anna's carefully neutral expression. What about Daniel? Was he always the way he is now? For the first time since Maya had met her, Anna's face softened into something approaching a genuine smile. Daniel was born with an old soul and a healer's heart. Even as a child, he would bring injured birds to the medicine lodge, refusing to leave until Ruth assured him they would survive. He sees people differently than his brother does. Where Blackstone sees possessions and tools, Daniel sees individuals worthy of respect and care. That must create tension between them. Anna's smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. More than you know. There are some in the village who whisper that Daniel should have been named Chief instead of his older brother. Our father saw the difference between his sons, but tradition demanded that leadership pass to the firstborn. Still, tradition also provides ways for leadership to change when a chief proves unworthy of the responsibility. Before Maya could ask what she meant by that cryptic statement, the sound of approaching footsteps made Anna straighten and return to her work. A moment later, Daniel Blackstone appeared at the lodge entrance, carrying a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. "Good afternoon, honored mothers," he said, using the formal address that showed respect for the women's roles as keepers of tradition and wisdom. "I hope I'm not interrupting important work." Ruth Moonhawk gestured for him to enter. "A healer is always welcome in the women's lodge, Daniel Blackstone. What brings you to us today?" Daniel stepped inside, his movements careful and respectful in the feminine space. "I brought something for Maya Rivers, if she's willing to accept it." He turned toward Maya, and she was struck again by the warmth in his dark eyes. "It belonged to my mother." Anna Featherwind suggested it might be appropriate for tonight's ceremony. He unwrapped the bundle to reveal a dress unlike anything Maya had ever seen. It was made of the softest buckskin, decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns that seemed to tell stories of their own. Feathers and small bones had been sewn into the design, along with what looked like genuine turquoise stones that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant blue flashes. "It's beautiful," Maya breathed, running her fingers over the delicate craftsmanship. "But I couldn't possibly wear something so precious. My mother would have wanted it to be worn by someone who understood its significance," Daniel said gently. "This dress was made for her wedding to my father, but it represents more than just marriage. The patterns tell the story of a woman's journey from her birth family to her chosen family, and the symbols embedded in the beadwork are meant to offer protection and wisdom to the wearer." Anna stepped forward and examined the dress with knowing eyes. "This is indeed a treasure, Daniel Blackstone. But are you certain your brother will approve of Maya wearing something with such historical significance?" Something flickered across Daniel's face, too quick for Maya to interpret, but not quick enough to escape Anna's notice. "My brother has many concerns to occupy his attention. I doubt he'll have time to examine the details of Maya's attire." Ruth Moonhawk made a soft sound that might have been amusement or approval. "The dress will need to be fitted. Anna, Grace, we have work to do. Daniel, you should return to your patients. The evening will bring its own challenges." Daniel nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the entrance to look back at Maya. "Remember what I told you yesterday about our laws. Tonight, during the feast, there will be speeches and ceremonies that may seem overwhelming. But the real decisions haven't been made yet. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." After he left, the women worked with quiet efficiency to alter the dress to fit Maya's frame. As they sewed and adjusted, Grace Starweaver continued her storytelling. But now her tales focused on women who had faced impossible choices and found ways to survive with their dignity intact. "There was once a woman named Singing Bird," Grace said, her needle flashing in the afternoon light. "She was promised to a chief of another tribe, a man known for his violence toward women. On the night before the wedding ceremony, she disappeared into the forest. For 7 days, the warriors searched but found no trace of her. On the 8th day, she returned, leading a pack of wolves." Maya paused in her own sewing. "Wolves?" The spirits had accepted her into their family, recognizing her pure heart and brave spirit. The violent chief could not marry a woman who belonged to the Wolf people, so she was free to choose her own path. She eventually married a gentle hunter who treated her as an equal partner, and their children grew up to be leaders who brought peace between many warring tribes. Anna caught Maya's eye and nodded slightly, as if to say that some stories were told for reasons beyond mere entertainment. Maya filed this tale away with all the other information she was gathering, building a mental map of possibilities and potential allies. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the women helped Maya into the wedding dress. It fit as if it had been made specifically for her, the soft leather molding to her body, while the beadwork caught the light and made her skin glow with reflected brilliance. When they arranged her hair and added the final touches of paint and jewelry, Maya barely recognized herself in the polished metal mirror Anna held up for her inspection. "You look like a Stonehawk woman," Ruth said with satisfaction. "But more than that, you look like someone who knows her own worth. Remember that feeling, child. Hold on to it no matter what happens tonight." The feast was already underway when Maya and her escorts arrived at the central fire pit where the entire village had gathered. Long tables made from split logs held an abundance of food: roasted venison and elk, fresh fish from Thunder River, vegetables from the communal gardens, and dozens of dishes Maya couldn't identify but which filled the air with mouth-watering aromas. Chief Blackstone sat at the head of the gathering, his warriors arranged around him like a living barrier between himself and his people. He wore his finest clothes and most impressive jewelry, but Maya noticed that his eyes kept scanning the crowd as if looking for signs of dissent or challenge. When he saw her approaching, his expression shifted to something that might have been satisfaction if it hadn't felt so predatory. "Maya Rivers," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the gathering. "Come, take your place beside me. Tonight we celebrate the joining of our families and the strengthening of old alliances." Maya walked forward with as much dignity as she could manage, aware that every eye in the village was upon her. The dress Daniel had given her seemed to whisper encouragement with every step, reminding her that she carried the blessing of his mother's memory and the protection of women who had faced similar trials. She took the seat that had been prepared beside the chief, noting that it was positioned slightly behind and below his own chair, marking her clearly as subordinate rather than equal. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present, and Maya caught several disapproving glances from some of the older villagers. Daniel sat with the council of elders on the opposite side of the fire, his face carefully neutral but his eyes alert. When their gazes met across the flames, Maya felt that same sense of anchoring she had experienced the day before. Whatever happened tonight, she was not completely alone. The feast began with traditional ceremonies honoring the spirits of the animals that had given their lives for the meal, the ancestors who had passed down the knowledge of survival, and the elements that sustained all life. Chief Blackstone spoke the ritual words correctly, but Maya sensed that he was merely going through the motions rather than feeling genuine reverence for the traditions he claimed to uphold. As the evening progressed and the food was consumed, the speeches began. Various tribal members stood to welcome Maya to the community, to praise the wisdom of uniting their people with the settlers of Whispering Pine Valley, and to express hope for continued prosperity under Chief Blackstone's leadership. The words were polite and appropriate, but Maya detected undercurrents of tension in some of the speakers' voices. It was when Elder Marcus Whitehawk rose to speak that the evening's true purpose became clear. Marcus was one of the oldest members of the tribe, a man whose memory reached back to the days before white settlers had arrived in the territory. His words carried the weight of accumulated wisdom and unquestioned moral authority. "Chief Blackstone," Marcus said, his voice strong despite his advanced age, "before we proceed with plans for tomorrow's ceremony, I must ask a question that tradition demands be answered." Chief Blackstone's jaw tightened, but he couldn't refuse to acknowledge an elder's formal inquiry. "Speak, honored grandfather." Marcus turned toward Maya, his weathered face kind but serious. "Maya Rivers, daughter of Thomas Rivers, you have been brought to our village to become the wife of our chief. This is a great honor, but it is also A choice that will bind not only you, but both our communities for generations to come. Therefore, I ask you now, before all these witnesses, do you enter this union of your own free will, with joy in your heart and hope for the future? The question hung in the air like smoke from the central fire, and Maya felt the weight of every gaze in the gathering. This was the moment Anna and the other women had been preparing her for, the test that would determine not just her own fate, but the future of the Stonehawk people's commitment to their ancient laws. Maya looked around the circle of faces, seeing hope in some, fear in others, and calculation in Chief Blackstone's cold stare. When her eyes found Daniel's across the fire, she saw him give the slightest nod, a gesture of encouragement that reminded her of everything they had discussed about choice in dignity and the courage required to speak truth in the face of power. She stood slowly, the wedding dress rustling softly in the sudden silence. Every bead and feather seemed to catch the firelight, making her appear to glow with inner radiance. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the gathering. Honored Elder Marcus Whitehawk, I thank you for asking the question that tradition requires. I also thank the Stonehawk people for welcoming me into their village and sharing their food and stories with a stranger. She paused, gathering her courage for what came next. But I cannot answer your question as you have asked it, because it assumes a choice that I have not been given. Chief Blackstone half rose from his seat, his face darkening with anger, but Elder Marcus held up a hand for silence. Continue, child. Speak your truth. Maya lifted her chin and looked directly at Chief Blackstone as she continued. I am here because my father owed a debt that could only be paid with horses and his daughter's freedom. I am here because powerful men decided my fate without asking for my opinion or consent. I am here because refusing would have brought violence upon my family and possibly upon your people as well. She turned back to Elder Marcus. So I ask you, honored grandfather, can a choice made under such circumstances truly be called free? Well, the silence that followed was so complete that Maya could hear the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of Thunder River flowing through the valley. She had just publicly challenged not only Chief Blackstone's authority, but the very foundation of the arrangement that had brought her here. Elder Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You speak wisdom, daughter. A choice made under threat is no choice at all. He turned toward Chief Blackstone, his voice taking on the formal tone of ancient law. Chief Blackstone, the woman has stated that she was not given free choice in this matter. According to the laws of our ancestors, no marriage ceremony can proceed without the bride's willing consent freely given. How do you answer this challenge? Chief Blackstone's face had gone from dark to thunderous, and Maya could see the muscles in his jaw working as he struggled to control his temper. When he spoke, his voice was carefully modulated, but she could hear the fury beneath the surface. The woman is confused by the strangeness of our customs and the emotion of the moment. She will have time to consider her position more carefully. Perhaps a night of reflection will help her understand the honor being offered to her. But Elder Marcus shook his head. The law does not provide for reflection or reconsideration. The question must be asked and answered here, before these witnesses, or the ceremony cannot proceed. Maya Rivers, I ask you again, do you consent to marry Chief Blackstone of your own free will? Maya felt the moment crystallize around her like ice forming on still water. Everything that happened next would flow from her answer to this question. She could submit, accept her fate, and try to find what happiness she could in a life of captivity. Or she could stand firm and face whatever consequences came from defying one of the most powerful men in the territory. She thought of her father, probably lying awake tonight, wondering if he had saved his family or destroyed his daughter. She thought of her mother, who had always taught her that a woman's greatest strength lay in knowing her own worth. She thought of Daniel Blackstone, sitting across the fire with hope and worry warring in his dark eyes. And she thought of all the Stonehawk women who had lived before her, including the one whose wedding dress she now wore. Women who had faced their own impossible choices and somehow found ways to survive with their spirits intact. "No," she said, the word ringing out clear and strong in the night air. "I do not consent to this marriage. I am grateful for the chief's offer, but I cannot accept it freely when my presence here was obtained through coercion rather than courtship." The explosion of voices that followed her declaration made it impossible to hear any individual response. But Maya could see Chief Blackstone rising from his seat, his face contorted with rage. Several of his warriors moved as if to surround her, but Elder Marcus stepped forward, his authority still strong enough to command respect even from angry young men. "The woman has spoken," Marcus announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "According to our laws, the matter is settled. There will be no marriage ceremony tomorrow." Chief Blackstone's voice rose above the crowd. "The woman is overwrought and doesn't understand what she's saying. She needs time to consider the consequences of rejecting such an honor." "The law is clear," Daniel Blackstone said, speaking. For the first time that evening, as he rose from his place among the elders, a woman's consent cannot be forced or assumed. If she says no, the matter is ended. The two brothers faced each other across the fire, and Maya realized she was witnessing the confrontation that had been building for years. This wasn't just about her refusal to marry Chief Blackstone. It was about two completely different visions for what the Stonehawk people should become. "You forget yourself, little brother," Chief Blackstone said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I am the leader of this tribe, and I will not be lectured about our laws by someone who spends his time playing with weeds and tending to weaklings." Daniel stepped forward, his own voice calm but carrying an edge of steel that Maya hadn't heard before. "I remember our father's teachings about justice and honor. I remember when being chief meant serving the people rather than using them. And I remember when our laws meant something more than words to be twisted for personal gain." The gathering had gone completely silent now, everyone understanding that they were witnessing something that would reshape their community one way or another. Chief Blackstone's hand moved toward the knife at his belt, and several of his warriors shifted closer, but Elder Marcus stepped between the two brothers before violence could erupt. "Enough," the old man said firmly. "This is a feast of welcome, not a battleground. Chief Blackstone, your brother has spoken correctly about our laws. The woman has refused your offer of marriage, and that refusal must be respected. Daniel Blackstone, you have shown proper concern for justice, but this is neither the time nor the place for challenges to leadership." He turned to address the entire gathering. "The evening has brought unexpected turns, but our laws have been followed and our traditions upheld. Maya Rivers will remain under the protection of the Stonehawk people as an honored guest until other arrangements can be made. The feast is ended." As people began to disperse, moving away from the fire in small groups that buzzed with whispered conversations, Maya found herself standing alone in the suddenly empty space where she had made her declaration. The wedding dress that had felt like armor now seemed fragile and exposed, and she realized she had no idea what came next. Anna Featherwind appeared at her side, taking her arm with gentle firmness. "Come, child. The night isn't over yet, and there are decisions to be made." As they walked back toward the women's lodge, Maya caught sight of Daniel Blackstone helping Elder Marcus navigate the uneven ground, their heads bent together in intense conversation. Chief Blackstone, meanwhile, stood beside the dying fire. Surrounded by his warriors, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Maya had won this battle, but she understood instinctively that the war was just beginning. Dawn broke gray and cold over Ironcliff Village, matching the mood that had settled over the community like fog from Thunder River. Maya woke to hushed voices outside the women's lodge and the sound of hurried footsteps on frozen ground. Something had changed during the night, and not for the better. Anna Featherwind was already awake, sitting cross-legged near the entrance with her ear pressed to the door flap. When she saw Maya stirring, she gestured for silence and continued listening to whatever conversation was taking place outside. 3 families left before sunrise, Anna whispered when the voices moved away. Took their children and their horses and headed toward the Eastern Territories. Word is spreading that more are planning to follow. Maya sat up, pulling a blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill. Because of what happened last night, because of what's coming next. Anna's expression was grim as she moved away from the entrance. When a chief's authority is challenged in public, he must respond or risk losing control entirely. Your refusal wasn't just about marriage, child. It was about whether our laws still mean anything, or whether one man's will has become more important than generations of wisdom. Before Maya could ask what she meant, Ruth Moonhawk pushed through the entrance flap, her medicine bag clutched tightly in one weathered hand and urgency written across her features. "We need to talk," Ruth said. Without preamble, all of us, away from listening ears and curious eyes. The 3 women made their way to a secluded grove behind the healing lodge, where the sound of running water from a nearby creek would mask their conversation from any potential eavesdroppers. Ruth checked carefully to ensure they weren't being followed before settling onto a fallen log and opening her medicine bag. "Chief Blackstone sent warriors to my lodge before dawn," she said, pulling out a collection of herbs and small bones that Maya didn't recognize. "They demanded to know if I had any medicines that could change a woman's mind about marriage, make her more agreeable to a man's wishes." Maya felt ice form in her stomach. "What did you tell them?" "That such things exist but are forbidden by our laws and my personal oath as a healer. I also told them that using such medicines would invalidate any marriage ceremony, since the woman's consent would not be genuine." Ruth's eyes were hard as flint. They were not pleased with my answer. Anna leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What else did they want?" "Information about Daniel's whereabouts. It seems the chief's brother didn't return to his lodge last night. No one has seen him since the feast ended." Ruth began sorting her herbs with practiced movements, but Maya could see the tension in her shoulders. "There are rumors that he rode out to consult with the council of neighboring chiefs, seeking support for traditional interpretations of our laws." The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. Daniel had risked everything by standing up for her the night before, and now he was either in hiding or seeking allies for what could become a tribal civil war. Either way, he was in danger because he had chosen to defend her right to refuse an unwanted marriage. "This is my fault," Maya said, guilt weighing down her words. "If I had just accepted the marriage, none of this would be happening." Ruth looked up from her herbs, her expression fierce. "Child, you did exactly what our laws required you to do. You spoke the truth when asked a direct question. The fault lies with those who would twist our traditions to serve their own desires, not with someone brave enough to uphold them." Anna nodded in agreement. "The Stonehawk people have been moving toward this conflict for 3 summers now. You didn't cause it, Maya Rivers. You simply provided the moment when everyone had to choose which path they would follow." A new voice interrupted their conversation, causing all 3 women to spin toward the sound. "And now that moment has passed and the real test begins." Elder Marcus Whitehawk emerged from behind a stand of pine trees, moving with surprising stealth for a man of his advanced years. His face was grave, and Maya noticed that he carried a war club at his side despite his age. "Honored grandfather," Ruth said, rising to offer him a respectful bow. "We didn't hear you approach." Old hunters learn to move quietly, even when their joints creak like rusty hinges. Marcus replied with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I came looking for you because there are developments you need to know about." He settled carefully onto another fallen log, his war club resting across his knees. "Chief Blackstone called an emergency council meeting this morning. He claims that Maya Rivers is not in her right mind, that the shock of leaving her family and adjusting to our ways has made her temporarily unstable. He wants permission to proceed with the marriage ceremony, despite her refusal, arguing that she doesn't truly understand what she's rejecting. Maya felt anger flare in her chest. That's ridiculous. I understood perfectly well what I was saying. Of course you did. But understanding and being able to prove it are different things. Entirely. Marcus's expression grew even more serious. The chief has also formally accused his brother of treason, claiming that Daniel deliberately coached you to refuse the marriage in order to undermine tribal authority and create chaos. The accusation was so outrageous that Maya couldn't immediately find words to respond. Anna spoke first, her voice tight with controlled fury. Daniel Blackstone is the most honorable man in this village. He spent his entire life serving our people, healing their injuries and illnesses without thought of reward or recognition. The idea that he would commit treason is absurd. Absurd to those who know him, Marcus agreed. But the chief has witnesses who claim they saw Daniel speaking privately with Maya before the feast, and others who say he gave her clothing that belonged to their mother, possibly as part of some elaborate plan to embarrass the chief in front of the entire tribe. Maya's hand moved instinctively to touch the wedding dress she still wore. The beautiful garment that had felt like protection the night before now seemed like evidence in a case being built against both her and Daniel. "What does the council say?" Ruth asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years and accumulated sorrow. "The council is divided. Some of the younger members support the chief, either out of genuine belief or fear of opposing him. Others remember the old ways and believe that traditional law must be upheld regardless of personal consequences. And a few are waiting to see which way the wind blows before committing themselves to either side." "And Daniel?" Maya asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Still missing. Which works against him in some ways, since his absence can be interpreted as guilt or cowardice. But it also means he's free to act, assuming he's still alive and able to do so." The casual mention of Daniel possibly being dead sent a chill through Maya that had nothing to do with the morning cold. She realized with sudden, startling clarity that her feelings for the gentle healer had grown beyond simple gratitude for his kindness. The thought of him being hurt or killed because he had tried to protect her was almost unbearable. "What can we do?" she asked. Marcus studied her for a moment, as if evaluating her resolve. "There is a way to resolve this conflict, but it would require considerable courage from someone who has already shown more bravery than most warriors twice her age. Tell me, our laws provide for something called the trial of truth, when accusations of serious crimes are made and the evidence is disputed. Any member of the tribe can demand that the matter be settled through formal challenge. The accused and the accuser each present their case before the full council of elders, and judgment is rendered based on ancient precedents and spiritual guidance." Anna frowned, but Daniel isn't here to speak for himself. "That's where courage comes in," Marcus said, his eyes fixed on Maya. "Our laws also allow for someone else to stand as advocate for the accused, presenting their case and accepting the consequences of victory or defeat. Maya Rivers, you could demand a trial of truth and serve as Daniel's advocate." Maya felt her heart begin to race. "What would that involve, exactly?" "You would have to prove that Daniel acted honorably, that your refusal to marry the chief was based on genuine conviction rather than manipulation, and that the chief's accusations are false." Marcus paused, letting the weight of what he was saying sink in. "You would also have to do it knowing that if you lose, both you and Daniel would face exile or worse. And if we win, then traditional law would be reaffirmed. Daniel would be cleared of all charges, and you would be free to make your own choices about your future without interference from anyone." Marcus's expression grew even more serious. But Maya Rivers, you must understand what you would be risking. Chief Blackstone has considerable influence, and there are members of the council who owe him favors or fear his retribution. Even if justice is on your side, victory is far from guaranteed. Maya looked around at the three faces watching her, seeing hope and fear warring in their expressions. These people had already risked much by helping her, and now she was being asked to gamble everything on a formal challenge that could either secure freedom for all of them or doom them to exile or death. She thought about Daniel Blackstone, somewhere out in the wilderness, possibly in danger because he had chosen to defend a stranger's rights over his own brother's desires. She thought about the Stonehawk women who had shared their stories and wisdom with her, teaching her that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. And she thought about her own mother's voice, telling her that a woman's greatest strength came from knowing her own worth and being willing to defend it. How do I demand this trial of truth? Marcus smiled for the first time that morning, and Maya caught a glimpse of the warrior he must have been in his youth. You walk into the council meeting and make the demand in front of all the elders. They cannot refuse a properly made request, even from someone who is not technically a member of our tribe. When is the meeting? It's happening now. They were waiting for the sun to clear the eastern peaks before beginning formal deliberations. Marcus stood, his war club sliding easily into his belt. If you're going to do this, child, it needs to be now, while emotions are still high and before anyone has time to arrange additional persuasion. Maya rose as well, brushing pine needles from the wedding dress and straightening her shoulders. Then let's go. Anna caught her arm as they prepared to leave the grove. Maya, are you certain about this? Once you make that demand, there's no taking it back. Maya looked at the older woman, seeing genuine concern in her eyes along with something that might have been pride. Anna, you told me yesterday that knowledge is armor. Well, I've learned that the Stonehawk people value courage and justice and truth. If I'm going to live among them, whether as Daniel's advocate or simply as someone seeking shelter, I need to prove that I understand what those values mean. Ruth stepped forward and pressed a small leather pouch into Maya's hand. Sage and sweetgrass, she explained. Burn them before you speak, and let the smoke carry your words to the spirits of our ancestors. They will know if you speak truth, and their presence will give weight to your arguments. The four of them made their way back toward the village center, where the sound of raised voices could already be heard coming from the great lodge. Maya felt her nervousness increasing with each step, but also a growing sense of determination. She had spent her entire life being told what to do by men who claimed to know what was best for her. Today, for the first time, she would speak with her own voice and demand that others listen. The great lodge was packed with tribal members, far more than could comfortably fit in the space. Men sat in carefully arranged circles according to their status and family affiliations, while women and children crowded around the edges and peered through gaps in the walls. At the center of it all, Chief Blackstone sat on an elaborate chair carved from a single piece of oak, his warriors arranged behind him like a living wall of intimidation. Maya paused at the entrance, suddenly aware of how she must look to these people. She was still wearing Daniel's mother's wedding dress. Her hair was braided in the style the women had taught her, and she carried herself with the poise they had helped her develop. To most of the assembled tribe, she probably looked like she already belonged among them. Whether that would help or hurt her cause remained to be seen. Chief Blackstone was in the middle of a speech about the importance of tribal unity and the dangers of allowing outsiders to interfere with traditional authority when Maya stepped into the lodge. Conversations died away as people noticed her presence, and soon the entire gathering was staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. Maya Rivers, the chief said, his voice carrying false warmth that fooled no one. How good of you to join us. I was just explaining to the council how difficult your adjustment to our ways has been. and how important it is that we make allowances for your emotional state. Maya walked forward until she stood in the center of the lodge, directly in front of the chief's chair. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, but she kept her eyes fixed on Chief Blackstone's face. As she reached into the pouch Ruth had given her and pulled out a pinch of the sacred herbs. Without speaking, she knelt and placed the sage and sweetgrass on the central fire. The smoke that rose from the burning plants carried the sharp, clean scent of the high mountains, and Maya heard several sharp intakes of breath from the assembled elders as they recognized the significance of her actions. "Honored chiefs and elders of the Stonehawk People," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "I come before you to demand justice according to the ancient laws of your ancestors." Chief Blackstone leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "You forget yourself, woman. This is a council of chiefs, not a place for emotional outbursts from confused young women." "I am not confused," Maya replied firmly. "And I am not making an emotional outburst. I am exercising a right that your own laws guarantee to any person seeking justice within Stonehawk territory." She turned to address the full circle of elders. "I demand a trial of truth to address the false accusations made against Daniel Blackstone, and I claim the right to serve as his advocate in these proceedings." The explosion of voices that followed her declaration made it impossible to hear individual responses, but Maya could see shock and approval warring on the faces around her. Chief Blackstone rose from his chair, his face dark with rage, but Elder Marcus stepped forward before the chief could speak. "The demand is properly made," Marcus announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "According to our laws, when a trial of truth is requested in the presence of the full council, it must be granted. Chief Blackstone, do you accept this challenge to your accusations against your brother?" For a moment, Maya thought the chief might refuse and risk the consequences of openly defying tribal law. His hand moved toward his weapon, and she could see the calculations running behind his eyes as he weighed the risks of violence against the risks of a formal trial he might not win. Finally he spoke, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I accept the challenge, but I demand that the trial take place immediately, before this woman has time to concoct additional lies or seek help from outside conspirators." Elder Marcus looked around the circle of chiefs, reading their faces with the skill of long experience. "The council agrees. The trial of truth will begin now, with Maya Rivers speaking for Daniel Blackstone and Chief Blackstone presenting his own accusations. Let the spirits of our ancestors guide us toward justice." Maya felt a mixture of relief and terror wash over her as she realized she had gotten what she asked for. Now came the hard part, proving that Daniel was innocent and that traditional law should triumph over personal ambition. The trial was about to begin, and everything she cared about hung in the balance. The great lodge fell silent as Elder Marcus raised his staff, the carved symbols along its length catching the firelight and casting dancing shadows on the walls. The formal trial of truth was unlike anything Maya had witnessed before, steeped in rituals that reached back through countless generations of Stonehawk tradition. "Before we begin," Marcus intoned, his voice taking on the ceremonial cadence reserved for the most sacred occasions, "let all present understand that this trial calls upon the wisdom of our ancestors and the judgment of the spirits themselves. Truth spoken here carries the weight of sacred oath, and lies will be known and punished by forces beyond mortal authority." Maya felt the solemnity of the moment settle over her like a heavy blanket. Around the lodge, tribal members who had been whispering and shifting in their seats grew perfectly still, understanding that they were about to witness something that would shape their community's future for generations to come. Chief Blackstone stood beside his chair, his finest ceremonial clothing and elaborate headdress making him appear larger and more imposing than usual. When he spoke, his voice carried the confidence of a man accustomed to having his word accepted. "Without question, Honored elders, I stand before you today to expose a conspiracy that strikes at the very heart of our tribal authority. My brother Daniel has betrayed not only his family, but his entire people by manipulating this foreign woman. To reject a marriage that would have strengthened our alliances and brought prosperity to our village. He began pacing as he spoke, his movements calculated to command attention and project strength. Consider the evidence. Daniel was seen speaking privately with Maya Rivers before the feast, filling her head with lies about our customs and encouraging her to defy the will of her chief. He gave her our mother's sacred wedding dress, a garment that should have remained in our family's possession, using it as a tool to make her appear more Stonehawk than she truly is. Maya watched the faces of the council members as Chief Blackstone continued his accusations, seeing some nod in agreement while others remained carefully neutral. The chief was an effective speaker, weaving together half-truths and implications, in a way that made his version of events sound plausible to those who wanted to believe him. Furthermore, the chief continued, Daniel disappeared immediately after the failed ceremony, proving his guilt and cowardice. A loyal brother would have remained to explain his actions and accept responsibility for the chaos he created. Instead, he fled like a criminal in the night, leaving others to clean up the mess he made. Chief Blackstone turned to face Maya directly, his eyes cold and calculating. And now this woman, this outsider who understands nothing of our ways or our needs, dares to stand in our sacred lodge and demand rights that belong only to true members of our tribe. She seeks to use our own laws against us, to twist our traditions into weapons that serve her selfish desires. The chief's voice rose as he reached the climax of his argument. I say to you, honored elders, that this trial itself is proof of the conspiracy I speak of. No foreign woman could know enough about our laws to demand such proceedings without careful coaching from someone intimately familiar with our customs. Daniel Blackstone has trained her well, but not well enough to hide the truth from those wise enough to see it. When Chief Blackstone finished speaking and returned to his seat, the lodge remained silent for several long moments. Maya could feel the weight of skeptical gazes upon her, understanding that many present found the chief's arguments convincing. How could she, a stranger to their people, hope to refute accusations presented with such authority and apparent logic? Elder Marcus turned toward her, his expression grave but not unkind. Maya Rivers, you have heard the accusations made against Daniel Blackstone and yourself. According to the laws governing this trial, you now have the right to present your defense. Speak truthfully, for the spirits of our ancestors are listening, and they will know if your words carry honor or deception. Maya rose slowly, feeling the wedding dress rustle around her as she stood. For a moment, the magnitude of what she was attempting threatened to overwhelm her. She was one young woman standing against the most powerful man in the tribe, trying to defend someone who wasn't even present to speak for himself. The odds seemed impossible, and failure would mean exile or death for both her and Daniel. But then she remembered Ruth's words about courage being something you found when you needed it most, and Anna's teaching that knowledge could serve as armor against even the strongest opponents. She thought of Daniel's kindness and integrity, qualities that deserved protection, even if defending them meant risking everything. Honored elders, she began, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her veins. I stand before you not as a foreign manipulator or a tool of conspiracy, but as someone who has learned to love and respect the true traditions of the Stonehawk people. Chief Blackstone speaks of loyalty and tribal authority, but he confuses those noble concepts with blind obedience to his personal desires. Maya walked to the center of the lodge, positioning herself where everyone could see and hear her clearly. The chief asks you to believe that Daniel Blackstone, a man who has spent his entire life healing your injuries and illnesses, who has never shown anything but love and service to this community, suddenly decided to commit treason for the sake of a stranger he had known for less than 2 days. Does this seem likely to those who have watched Daniel grow from boy to man, who have seen his character tested time and again. She paused, letting that question settle in the minds of her listeners before continuing. The chief also wants you to believe that I, a woman raised in the wilderness by a fur trapper, somehow learned enough about your complex legal traditions to manipulate them for my own benefit. But I ask you, where would I have gained such knowledge? Not from Daniel, who spoke to me only briefly and only about the importance of treating people with dignity and respect. Maya gestured toward the women's section of the lodge where Anna and Ruth sat watching with expressions of supportive anxiety. I learned about your laws from the women of this village, who welcomed me into their lodge and taught me the stories of your ancestors. I learned about the sacredness of consent from Elder Marcus himself, who asked me the traditional question that revealed the truth of my situation. And I learned about courage and justice from observing the daily life of your community, seeing how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. The lodge was completely silent now, every person present hanging on Maya's words. She could see that her arguments were having an effect, creating doubt about the chief's version of events and opening minds to alternative interpretations. Chief Blackstone speaks of my refusal to marry him as if it were an insult to your entire people, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. But your own laws that reach back through generations of wisdom, require that a woman's consent be freely given. When Elder Marcus asked me if I consented to the marriage, I answered honestly, as your traditions demanded. To do otherwise would have been a betrayal of everything the Stonehawk people stand for. Maya turned to face Chief Blackstone directly, meeting his angry glare with steady resolve. The real question this trial must answer is not whether Daniel Blackstone coached me to refuse an unwanted marriage, but whether your laws mean what they say, or whether they can be ignored whenever they inconvenience those in power. She walked back toward the center of the lodge, her next words addressed to the full council. I wear the wedding dress of Daniel's mother, not because he gave it to me as part of some conspiracy, but because he recognized that I needed armor for a battle I didn't choose to fight. This garment represents the memory of a woman who understood that marriage should be based on love and respect, not fear and coercion. Maya paused at the central fire, the same flames that had witnessed her refusal to marry Chief Blackstone the night before. The chief says that Daniel fled like a criminal, but perhaps he simply recognized that his brother's anger had moved beyond reason and that staying would have meant violence rather than justice. Sometimes wisdom lies in seeking allies and support, rather than engaging in fights that cannot be won through strength alone. She turned back to the assembled elders, her voice carrying a note of challenge that surprised even herself. Chief Blackstone asks you to choose between tribal loyalty and individual rights, as if those two things must always be in conflict. But I have learned that the Stonehawk people are strongest when they honor both community needs and personal dignity. Your ancestors understood this, which is why they created laws that protect the weak from the powerful and ensure that consent cannot be forced or assumed. Maya felt her momentum building as she saw nods of agreement from some of the older council members, men who remembered the teachings of previous generations and valued traditional wisdom over political convenience. I did not come to your village seeking to cause division or challenge authority, she continued. I came as a daughter traded away by a desperate father to settle debts that were not of my making. But once here, I was welcomed by women who taught me that dignity and self-respect were not luxuries to be set aside when they became inconvenient. I was shown kindness by a healer who treated me as a person worthy of consideration rather than an object to be possessed. The lodge remained perfectly silent, but Maya could sense the shifting mood of her audience. Her words were finding their mark, creating doubt about the chief's accusations and sympathy for her position. Daniel Blackstone is guilty of only one thing, Maya declared, her voice ringing with conviction. He is guilty of remembering what his father taught about justice and honor. He is guilty of treating a stranger with the same respect he would show to any member of his own tribe. And he is guilty of believing that your laws mean what they say, even when enforcing them creates personal conflict. Maya moved closer to the Council of Elders, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone that forced them to lean forward to hear her words. Honored grandfathers, you have the power to decide what kind of people the Stonehawk will become. You can choose to follow a path where might makes right, and the powerful can take whatever they desire, regardless of law or tradition. Or you can choose to uphold the wisdom of your ancestors, to prove that justice and dignity still have meaning in this changing world. She straightened to her full height, the wedding dress catching the firelight and making her appear to glow with inner radiance. I ask you not to vindicate me or Daniel Blackstone, but to vindicate yourselves and the values you claim to hold sacred. Show your children and grandchildren that laws exist to protect everyone, not just those wealthy or strong enough to enforce their will through violence. Maya walked back to her original position, her final words delivered with quiet intensity that carried to every corner of the lodge. Chief Blackstone says I am a foreign woman who knows nothing of your ways. But I have learned that the Stonehawk people value truth above comfort, justice above convenience, and courage above safety. If those values make me foreign to your chief's vision of leadership, then I am proud to stand apart from it. When Maya finished speaking and took her seat, the silence in the lodge was so complete that the crackling of the fire sounded like thunder. She had laid out her defense as clearly and powerfully as she could, challenging not just the specific accusations against Daniel, but the entire philosophy underlying Chief Blackstone's rule. Elder Marcus rose slowly, his ancient bones creaking audibly in the stillness. The advocates have spoken. Now the council must deliberate and render judgment, according to the wisdom of our ancestors and the guidance of the spirits. The deliberation process was unlike anything Maya had ever witnessed. The elders did not simply vote or argue among themselves, but engaged in a complex ritual that involved prayer, meditation, and consultation with spiritual advisors who read signs in the fire, the flight of birds visible through the lodge's smoke hole, and the patterns of shadows on the walls. As the hours passed, Maya watched the faces of the council members, trying to read their expressions and guess which way their judgment might fall. Some appeared sympathetic to her arguments, nodding thoughtfully and glancing toward her with expressions of approval. Others seemed unconvinced, their loyalty to Chief Blackstone or fear of change keeping them aligned with his version of events. The most concerning group was those who appeared genuinely conflicted, understanding the merits of both sides, but struggling to decide which path would best serve their people's long-term interests. Maya realized that these undecided elders would likely determine the outcome of the trial, and she had no way of knowing which arguments had resonated most strongly with them. As the sun reached its peak and began its descent toward the western mountains, the deliberation finally concluded. Elder Marcus rose once again, his expression grave as he prepared to announce the council's decision. "The spirits have spoken," he intoned, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The Council of Elders has reached its judgment in the matter of accusations against Daniel Blackstone and the demand for justice made by Maya Rivers." Maya felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited for the words that would determine her fate and Daniel's. Around the lodge, tribal members leaned forward in anticipation, understanding that they were about to witness a moment that would reshape their community's future. After careful consideration of all evidence and arguments presented, Marcus continued, "We find that the accusations of treason and conspiracy lack sufficient proof to warrant punishment. Daniel Blackstone's actions, while perhaps unwise in their timing, were consistent with his character and his understanding of our traditional laws." Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she forced herself to remain still and listen to the complete judgment. "Furthermore," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger, "we find that Maya Rivers spoke truthfully about her circumstances and her reasons for refusing marriage to Chief Blackstone. Her knowledge of our laws came through proper teaching from respected members of our community, not through manipulation or conspiracy. The elder paused, his eyes moving around the circle of faces watching him with rapt attention. However, this trial has revealed a deeper problem within our community. We have allowed personal disputes to overshadow our commitment to justice and traditional wisdom. We have forgotten that leadership serves the people, not the other way around. Chief Blackstone's face had grown darker with each word of the judgment, and Maya could see his hands clenching into fists as he realized the direction the council's decision was taking. Therefore, Marcus concluded, we render the following judgment. Daniel Blackstone is cleared of all accusations and may return to his place in the community with honor intact. Maya Rivers is recognized as a person under the protection of Stonehawk law, free to make her own choices about marriage and her future. And Chief Blackstone is reminded that our laws exist to serve justice, not personal ambition. The explosion of voices that followed the announcement made it impossible to hear individual reactions, but Maya could see the mixture of celebration and anger rippling through the crowd. She had won the trial, Daniel was vindicated, and traditional law had been upheld. But she also understood that this victory had come at a tremendous cost in terms of tribal unity and Chief Blackstone's willingness to accept limits on his power. As people began to disperse from the lodge, many stopping to offer congratulations or words of support, Maya caught sight of a familiar figure standing near the entrance. Daniel Blackstone had returned, his clothes dusty from travel and his face showing the strain of days spent in uncertainty and exile. Their eyes met across the crowded lodge, and Maya saw relief and gratitude warring with something deeper and more complex in his expression. He had risked everything to defend her right to choose her own path, and she had risked everything to clear his name and uphold the principles they both believed in. Now, for the first time since arriving in Ironcliff Village, Maya faced a future where her choices were truly her own to make. 3 moons passed after the trial of truth, and Ironcliff Village settled into a new rhythm that felt both familiar and transformed. The aspen leaves had turned golden and begun their gentle descent to earth, carpeting the pathways with whispered promises of winter's approach. Maya walked these paths daily now, no longer as a stranger seeking shelter, but as someone who had earned her place through courage and conviction. The Healing Lodge had become her second home, where she worked alongside Daniel to tend the sick and injured. Her hands, once soft from a sheltered life, now bore the calluses of honest work and the stains of medicinal herbs. She had proven surprisingly gifted at the healer's art, possessing an intuitive understanding of which plants could soothe pain and which combinations would speed recovery. Chief Blackstone had remained in his position, but his authority had been forever altered by the trial's outcome. The Council of Elders watched him more closely now, and tribal members felt emboldened to question decisions that seemed to serve personal interest over community welfare. He still commanded respect, but it was the careful respect given to a dangerous animal rather than the reverence due to a wise leader. The real change came in smaller, quieter ways. Families that had fled during the crisis began returning, drawn back by reports that traditional law had reasserted itself. Young people started asking more questions about their heritage and rights, no longer content to accept authority without understanding. Women spoke more freely in council meetings, their voices carrying new weight after witnessing Maya's successful challenge to absolute power. Daniel had resumed his healing practice with renewed purpose, but Maya noticed changes in him as well. The gentle man who had always preferred peaceful solutions now carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced a great test and emerged stronger. Their working partnership had evolved into something deeper, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than mere attraction. On this particular evening, as autumn painted the sky in shades of rose and amber, Maya sat on the bench Daniel had built outside her small lodge. She wore a simple dress of her own making, decorated with beadwork patterns the women had taught her. The silver brooch shaped like a columbine still adorned her collar, but now it felt less like borrowed armor and more like a symbol of the home she had chosen to create. Daniel approached from the direction of the healing lodge, carrying 2 cups of the pine needle tea that had become their evening ritual. He settled beside her on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched but not so close as to presume anything about her feelings or intentions. "Ruth says the Morrison family's youngest will make a full recovery," he said, handing her one of the cups. "That poultice you suggested broke the fever completely." Maya accepted the tea gratefully, enjoying the warmth against her palms as much as the evidence of their successful collaboration. "Ruth taught me that healing comes as much from hope as from herbs. When people believe they're truly cared for, their bodies remember how to fight." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. This had become their way, finding peace and shared quiet after days filled with the demands of healing and community service. Maya had learned that Daniel's silences were different from his brother's. Were Chief Blackstone's quietness often masked calculation or anger, Daniel's reflected genuine contentment and inner calm. "I received word from Fort Clearwater today," Daniel said eventually, his voice careful and neutral. "Your father sent a letter asking about your welfare and expressing hope that you found happiness among us." Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest at the mention of her family. She had forgiven her father for the impossible choice he'd been forced to make, but forgiveness didn't erase the pain of being traded away like livestock to settle debts not of her making. "What did you tell him?" "That you're healthy and respected, that you found meaningful work, and that you're free to make your own decisions about your future." Daniel paused, studying her profile in the fading light. "I also told him that, if he wishes to visit, he would be welcome in our village as the father of someone we hold in high regard." Maya turned to look at him, seeing warmth and understanding in his dark eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Daniel set down his cup and reached into a small pouch at his belt, withdrawing something that caught the last rays of sunlight. It was a ring, carved from a single piece of turquoise and polished to a soft gleam that reminded Maya of Thunder River under summer skies. "Maya Rivers," he said, his voice steady but touched with emotion. "You came to our village as a stranger, but you chose to become one of us through your own courage and convictions. You stood up for justice when it would have been easier to submit. You defended my honor when I couldn't defend myself. You proved that belonging isn't about blood or birth, but about the values you're willing to fight for." He held the ring between them, not offering it yet but letting her see the craftsmanship and thought that had gone into its creation. "I'm not asking you to marry me because of debt or duty or tribal politics. I'm asking because I love the woman you've chosen to become and because I believe we could build something beautiful together." Maya felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. Here was the proposal she had never dared to imagine, offered freely by a man who had proven his worth through actions rather than words, asking for her hand because he valued her as an equal partner rather than a possession to be acquired. "Daniel Blackstone," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, "I accept your proposal not because I need protection or shelter, but because I choose to bind my life to yours. Because you've shown me what love looks like when it's built on respect and shared values." He slipped the turquoise ring onto her finger, and Maya marveled at how perfectly it fit, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The stone felt warm against her skin, carrying the promise of a future they would create together. "When should we tell the village?" Daniel asked, his smile transforming his entire face. "Tomorrow," Maya replied, leaning into his embrace as the stars emerged in full glory above them. "Tonight, let's just sit here and enjoy the quiet." They remained on the bench until late into the evening, talking softly about their hopes for the future and the work they would continue doing together. Around them, Ironcliff Village settled into sleep, secure in the knowledge that justice and traditional wisdom had prevailed. Maya had begun her journey as a woman traded for horses to a cruel chief, but she would end it as the freely chosen wife of a gentle healer, having transformed not only her own destiny, but the very fabric of the community that had reluctantly welcomed her. The Stonehawk people had rediscovered what it meant to honor their ancestors' teachings about dignity, consent, and the courage required to defend what was right. As the final embers of cooking fires died away and silence claimed the village, Maya understood that she had found something more precious than safety or comfort. She had found home, not in a place but in the principles she had chosen to defend, and the man who had stood beside her when the cost of standing seemed too high to bear. The columbine brooch caught starlight and threw it back in gentle gleams, a reminder that some flowers bloomed most beautifully in the harshest soil, and that love freely given was the strongest foundation any life could claim. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.